The average multi-millionaire has 7 streams of passive income. Is that true? So in this video, I'm going to talk about whether it's a myth that the average multi-millionaire has 7 streams of passive income. Before doing that, go over to my website on adamfire.com, especially if you're an expat or a high net wealth individual, and see how I can assist you. Now, basically, it's technically true that the average multi-millionaire has 7 streams of passive income, but it's very misleading, and I'll tell you why. There's 2 or 3 reasons essentially why it's misleading. I mean, number one of the most obvious things is that doesn't account for how much you're making from each source of passive income. In other words, if somebody who's a millionaire is kind of earning a very tiny amount of money from a stock somewhere or a real estate purchase somewhere, even if it's only $10 a month, $20 a month, that will be counted towards those 7 streams. You know, the whole statistics lies, damn statistics, that saying is very much true here. Likewise, when it comes to things like YouTube or Medium partnership programs or those kind of online sources of passive income, I know several people who are really wealthy who signed up to those kind of things because they thought it would be a good extra stream of income, and it ended up only paying them $10 a month, for example, but you know, they just kept it going because, well, why not? Because they already signed up. So that's the first thing. That doesn't mean that everyone who has 7 streams of income has 7 streams of good income, including very wealthy people. So that's misleading. But I think a second reason, this is a bigger thing, is this. Most very wealthy people started with 1 stream of income and only diversified later on. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take an extreme example here. Let's talk about somebody like, I don't know, Bill Gates. What did he do? He set up Microsoft. 100% of his wealth was linked to Microsoft for some time, but then he sold Microsoft, or at least once he floated Microsoft, he gradually reduced how much Microsoft shares he owned. He still owns some Microsoft shares, but the point is he was 100% in Microsoft for a long time. He might have had some personal cash, just a little bit of cash, but pretty much close to 100% of his wealth was linked to Microsoft for a long period of time. Now, I think he has more than 7 streams, I'm sure, of passive income, and most of his actual stock portfolio is not linked to Microsoft. You can actually see his stock portfolio online, I believe, from the firm that are managing his stock portfolio. So now he might have 17 or even 70 streams of passive income, but when he was actually generating most of his wealth, it was linked to 1 stock, and then once he had succeeded, he then diversified. Now, you might say that's an extreme example, but there are plenty of what I would call everyday millionaires as well. You know, somebody who sets up a company who, sells it for 5 or 10 million, then diversifies. Or for that matter, you know, there are plenty of people out there who just have their day job, like they're a teacher or an accountant or whatever. They save and invest from a long period of time. They get wealthy slowly. And then maybe when they're very old or 10 years before retirement, they focus on diversifying into many different streams of income. But the point is, most people I know who got very wealthy, at least for the majority of their time, they focused on just 1 or maximum 2 sources of income. Usually a primary income, i.e. they have a job or they have a business, and then maybe some investing on the side. But very few people that I know who have become very successful have had literally 5 or 10 projects going on at the same time, and there's a reason for that. It brings me back to my days at university. One of my university lecturers gave me a good tip. One of the better tips, by the way, I have to say, considering some of the bad tips I got, but he gave me a good tip, and he said, never choose a double major. If you want to choose a major, just choose 1 subject or a major minor, like politics of international relations as a major minor. Don't choose something like politics and German, for example, and there's a simple reason for that. If you choose just 1 subject to study, you can spend 100% of your time on that 1 subject. Whereas in comparison, if you have a double major, even though theoretically each one should take 50% of your time, what's going to happen in reality is each one is going to take 60 or 70% of your time. So you're actually going to end up with 120 or 140%. So in other words, you're going to end up with 20 to 30 to 40% extra work for getting the same qualification for not a huge amount of benefit unless you really need those 2 things. And I think the same thing is very much true when it comes to business, but even more so. Now, let me explain that. Let's say if somebody's got 10 streams of income and they're each making him or her $5,000 a year, right? So they're making $35,000 a year from 7 streams of income, each making $5,000 a year. Now, obviously, that's not going to be the case. It's never going to be the case. You're going to earn exactly the same from each source of income, but I'm just using this as an example, right? Now, you might say, well, okay, it's easy then. All they need to do is, if they want to make $70 a year, is get double at each of them, right? And get better at each of them. But there's an obvious problem with that, right? If you're just focused on one source of income or 2 sources of income, you can become a specialist in that area. You can become focused, laser focused on that area. But if you've got 7 streams of income, and let's say you're, I don't know, spending Mondays focusing on insurance and health insurance, and tomorrow on Tuesday on, I don't know, real estate, and getting people to sign leases, and Wednesdays on, I don't know, a marketing agency, search engine optimization, you've got an obvious problem there because you're splitting your time, but there are several companies who will be completely focused on just insurance or search engine optimization or real estate or whatever it is. So usually, in fact, almost always, the best returns are becoming very specialized in one area. Because if you don't become specialized in one area, what tends to happen is if you've got 10 projects going on at the same time, they each take 20 to 30% of your time, which means you've got up to 200, 300, like you're working twice or 3 times as hard, in the same way somebody who does a double major is working harder for no extra benefit. That's one thing. But then also the fact you're not getting specialized knowledge, because if you're just focusing on one area every month, every year, your knowledge is compounding. Whereas if you've got all these different areas, it's going up more slowly because you've got to focus on all the areas and they all go up slowly. Whereas the person focusing on one area can just go like this, right? So in reality, it's very difficult to focus on many different areas. Yes, it's true, you might lower your risk focusing on many different areas, but that's usually something that's better once you're strong enough to do that. So once a business is worth, multi-millions, for example, or maybe even, $1 million or $2 million of yearly revenue, you could maybe argue that it makes sense to at least diversify a little bit into side services, especially if those side services, you're not actually doing the work yourself, you're just referring them to partners. Like, for example, if you're a real estate agent in, London, and you have referral partners for insurance or financial services or whatever, if it's not taking up too much of your time, it might make sense once you're strong enough to have that kind of relationship. But I think the point I'm making is, in general, focus is key. It's not just working hard or working smart, it's working in a hard, smart, focused way over a very long period of time, at least 5 or 10 years. And if you do that, if you just focus on one thing that you're good at for 5 or especially 10 years, and you do it in a hard, smart and focused way, you'll beat most people, because most people will give up too easily. Most people will work hard, but they'll focus on many different areas. So I would say keep focused on just 1 or 2 sources of income. And the best way to do that, I would say, is either get a job, get good at it, see what the problems are in the industry, then start your own business, having seen those issues, and or just focus on, getting a job that you like, that you're making enough money where you can actually save and invest a bit of money, and then focus your attention on investing on the side, because that is not kind of taken away from your primary job, which is not a business, if you see what I mean. So just focusing on 1 or 2 things makes a lot more sense than 7 or 10 sources of passive income. The only exception might be once you're older, close to retirement. Yes, you could say it makes a lot of sense to take risk off the table. If you just sold your company for 10, 20 million, it definitely doesn't make sense just to focus on the highest possible return and put it all into one asset class or one business. It does make sense to diversify your risk, but for most people, it doesn't for the majority of your working life, which leads me to my final comment, and that's that going narrow and deep doesn't always actually make things more risky. Now, what do I mean by that? In the same way that if you're investing privately, investing into just one stock is much riskier than being 100% in stocks. If the 100% of stocks is the whole stock market. In other words, buying one stock is not the same thing as just buying one stock market like the S&P 500, which is an index of many, many stocks. So when people say, oh, it's risky to be 100% in stocks, that's usually true, but not if you're 100% in the whole stock market like MSCI World or the S&P 500, because by definition, you're already diversified then, especially if you can just be long-term. And likewise, when it comes to business, just because you're focused on one area doesn't mean you can't lower your risk. For example, if you're a lawyer who has clients in the UK, and then you learn how to do things online, and you have clients in 50 countries or 100 countries, you are reducing your risk dramatically, even though you're staying in that narrow and deep area of law. Although maybe that's not a good example because lawyers often have to learn different legal systems. But if you think about what I'm doing in financial services, having clients all around the world, it's definitely reduced my risk. Or, even if you've got somebody who's got, I don't know, a bar in the UK, like for example, the bar which became famous amongst Chinese people for serving the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, if they did something like, I don't know, online kind of walk around tours of that bar and they got money from all around the world, you get the point I'm making. You can still reduce your risk and be diversified, but stay in one lane.